Salutations, my friends, and thank you for tuning in to another edition of Factions of Freedom. I'm your host, Noisera, Freedom Faction, whichever one you prefer, and I have titled this episode Terraforming Earth Invasion. Now, if you guys have not watched Terraforming Earth Impact or Terraforming Earth Intent, I would definitely say go check it out because they all compound with one another. And this is just basically continuing on that pattern where we are indeed seeing what happens whenever we have these elitists, these Luciferians, the Illuminati, whenever we see all these other things taking place, these environmental crises that we'll get into in the actual episode, things such as Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050, renewable energy, sustainable development, the technocracy, and environmental lawsuits, and the like, everything else that comes with just that. So we're definitely going to be getting into a lot because a lot of stuff has developed. Clearly, we're going to be talking about climate change and all kinds of things along this line. But before we do, a few updates so you know you guys are always caught up and paying attention to everything that we're doing. If you haven't heard, we are already dropping our Series 1.0 line, or a Series 1 line, the clothing line that basically helps continue out the project that we're doing. Now, if you guys buy anything from the Series 1 line, and this is the sale that we'll be having actually go on from this week until next week, I'm doing a discount and price lowering, but if you guys buy anything from the Series 01 line, you get access to the exclusive content RSS feed. That doesn't mean that you're necessarily a user or a member, but you actually do get access to the previous things that are on that feed right there. So definitely check out the clothing line, and we'll have a link for it in the description bar below. Make sure you're paying attention to Paradox Radio, where you can hear some of the mini casts that are actually on the exclusive content feed. And as always, if you guys want, just become a Patreon subscriber for $4.99 a month or more if you would like to. And with that, you know, you get access to the archive seasons because we have to take those down with everything that's going on with the censorship. It's probably better that way. You get access to the monthly music that we're doing, the discounts that I mentioned before with the clothes and the products and everything else that we have, as well as early access to episodes and everything else that we're doing. And if you don't want to do any of that, just make sure you're paying attention to the website, factionsoffreedom.gemdo.com, and once you're there, you can get the most recent submission of the Patreon exclusive, of the exclusive membership content that we've done. But enough self-plugging. Let's actually jump into the show and start talking about all these other things that are going on. So as I said before, this actual episode is titled Terraforming Earth Invasion because have you seen the news? Have you been paying attention to the news? With Energy Secretary Rick Perry to Exxon Mobil, to Dow Chemicals, to the Dakota Access Pipeline, to the Paris Climate Agreement, to climate change, Bill Nye even, you know, let's not get into that. Or maybe if we have time, we'll get into that. But there's a lot of different things going on these days. Really, there really is. And with the Terraforming Earth series, I tried to allude just that, the fact that we are living in a world where indeed things are getting terraformed, where I feel like, are being terraformed by some alien presence, by some evil force that we've got to combat. And so one of the reasons that this episode is actually spurred, because if you guys haven't, definitely go back and listen to the episodes that we did earlier this week. The biggest lies told to mankind, and the elites make their move, was one of the reasons as to why this was spurred on, with the White House changing their climate change meeting to other countries actually talking about how they're pressuring Donald Trump to get more involved in the climate change debate. There's a lot of different things that have to come into this that explain everything that I'm talking about. So if anything, this would be a good point to jump into the White House and how they have changed the climate change, how the White House climate change meeting has been postponed. The White House postponed a Tuesday meeting to discuss whether the United States should withdraw from the landmark international climate deal struck in Paris under the Obama administration. The White House said late Monday that the meeting would be rescheduled. This is the second time a meeting of top aides on the issue has been delayed. Donald Trump pledged during the presidential campaign to renegotiate the accord, but he was wavered on the issue since winning the presidency. His top officials have appeared divided about what to do about the deal. Under the United States pledged to significantly reduce planet warming carbon emissions in the coming decade. Now, before I continue, this is a lot of what we're going to be seeing, more so. We're talking about Agenda 21, we're talking about Agenda 2030, we're talking about the socioeconomic reformation, the green revolution, the technocracy. All of these things are all encompassed. All of these things play a huge part in what we're going to be seeing take place over the next course of couple of years. And we've talked about this before in the episode Trumping in the Technocracy. Whether or not Trump believes in climate change or anything like that, that's not up to him. We've already been signed up to things that are going on in the world, and we're already about it. As he's trying to renegotiate that, that's perfectly fine. And if anything, what we'll do after this article is actually talk about how the Chinese are actually staying committed to their pledge. Okay, and so that's what we're seeing here as well. There's another article too where Bernie Sanders has put forth a bill to make us more in alignment with Agenda 2030, with a sustainable development mindset, where we're talking about things like renewable energy. And you know, I know all of this stuff sounds crazy right off the bat, but what we're talking about ultimately is climate change, global warming, the Anthropocene, the effects of the human experience on Earth in 2017, and how all of these things are incorporated. And we talk about it as well, how they bioaccumulate. But we'll be getting into all that stuff later. Don't worry. But let me just get into this, and then we'll continue on. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the former chief executive of the company Exxon, said at his Senate confirmation hearing in January that he supports staying in the deal. But the Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt has said that the Paris Pact, quote, is a bad deal for America that will cost jobs. I remember putting out an article about how the paradigm shift that we're seeing right now, how it's actually saved jobs. So it depends on what jobs are being saved and what jobs are being brought in. But continuing, Ivanka Trump, who serves as an advisor to her father, was supposed to meet separately Tuesday with Pruitt and Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska, saying that the meeting is still expected to take place, according to a White House official who requested anonymity to discuss private talks. The Paris Accord, signed by nearly 200 nations in 2015. So that's why when I talk about Donald Trump, not believing in climate change or not doing something about climate change, that's perfectly fine, because we are dealing with a world where that's not up for debate. We can sit here and we can talk semantics, the devil in the details. If climate change is a hoax, I think Al Gore is a hoax. I think that's more or less what people are talking about. But the effects of the human experience, as well as modern society on everything else that's going on, that cannot be disputed. So for the Paris Accord to be signed by 200 nations shows indeed that we're actually seeing the efforts of the human experience on the world. Okay, and they're trying to do something about that, and that's what I've actually talked about in the episode with Lori, Marty, and Robbie, where we were talking about the elites making their move, and this is something we'll get into later on with the Hartford site, nuclear Washington, or the nuclear site in Hartford, Washington, and how that spill took place, and how so many different spills took place this week. It's crazy. I mean, even the Dakota Access Pipeline spill, I think it's spilled 82 gallons. I know it's very simple, but it's not even finished. It's still in construction, and it's already leaking oil. Okay, so let me get back into this article. The Paris Accord, signed by nearly 200 nations in 2015, was never ratified by the Senate due to the staunch oppositions of the Republicans. It therefore does not have the force of a binding treaty, and the United States could potentially withdraw from the deal without legal penalty. A senior administration official said that the president's inclination has been to leave the pact, but Ivanka Trump set up a review process to make sure he received information from experts in the public and private sector before making a decision. The official requested anonymity to discuss private conversations. So basically, Trump's daughter is keeping him abreast with this issue. Now, I don't think that we elected Ivanka Trump or a younger Hillary. I don't think that we did that. But that's what we're dealing with in 2017. So while we're talking about how there's a meeting in the climate change being postponed, I think what we're ultimately seeing is, and as soon as I saw this happen, I thought again, okay, well, here comes another environmental disaster. Here comes more explosions. Here comes more chemical plants. Here comes something to allude to the fact that our world needs to be taken care of, that our planet needs to be taken care of. And I'm sure I have people that are listening wondering, what is that about? Why should we even care about the planet? Why are we coming in talking about climate change? Well, as I said before in the intro, this is all tied in together. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050, and the New World Order. Even Pope Francis, he's a chariot for the green agenda. This is how they will circumvent, or at least this is how they will get around international laws. This is how they'll get past the Constitution, the Bill of Rights for things like here in America, because we'll have to abide by international treaties signed by 200 nations. If that's not the New World Order, I don't know what to tell you is. You see, we're looking at these types of things go on in the lens of understanding how that affects us, or at least what these people are actually trying to do. You see, we have to understand that this is not a simple thing. I mean, the international laws on climate change have changed from nearly 60 laws to 1,200 in nearly 20 years. Very simple, right? Wrong. And now we have CIA Director John Brennan talking about how his preferred method of geoengineering is stratospheric aerosol injections, chemtrails. We also have NASA admitting that they use chemtrails to expose Americans to deadly chemicals. So I don't think that we should freak out whenever we have water protectors in North Dakota trying to just make sure that we have clean drinking water. Many will quoting water is life. You see, I think that there's a lot of different things that we need to look at when it comes to talking about what exactly climate change is, what that means for us, how that's going to change everything that we see going on. I mean, no one wants to talk about Fukushima and how any of the radiation is going into Seattle, Washington, California, any of the places over there on the western seaboard. We're just going to completely act like none of that happened. You see? So there's a few things whenever we start talking about all this stuff that we have to put into perspective. While we're over here simultaneously destroying the world, we're not necessarily asking ourselves, what does that mean for us? What happens whenever we decide that we don't really care about the planet? You know? I know, like I said, I know that sounds silly, but let's continue on. I have another article up for you guys, and it is from Christian Science Monitor, okay, and it was put up May 9th. It's titled, How Other Nations Are Urging President Trump to Stay in the Paris Agreement. Now, the reason why I want to mention this real quick before we move on to our next topic is because we've got to look at how the Paris Agreement sets the stage for Agenda 21, for Agenda 2030, for everything that we see taking place. Sustainable development is what they're calling it. It is the restructuring of the planet. Green friendly, eco friendly. This is why you see this is if anything, you know, one of the reasons why that we had I Wake Sheeple on Christine to talk about these types of things. You know, what are alternative ways to live? But you've got to ask the question, why are we looking at alternative ways to live? Because people don't want to live in a fossil fuel gas filled planet that has all kinds of meat destruction and chemicals and you name it. You know, the world that we live in is not sustainable. Hence why they've given Agenda 2030 the subtitle Sustainable Development. And that's one of their goals, is to indeed make a world where we are basically in harmony with the planet. And I know that sounds great. That sounds philanthropic. It sounds beautiful. It sounds great. But at the same time, we've got to look at who is actually doing this and why are they doing this. They will try to control resources. They will try to control free energy. And this is why you see Nikola Tesla actually coming out with his infinity warranty with the solar panels. Alluding to I haven't actually got into that one and read that actual article, but I'm assuming it's because, well, you know, they're powered by the sun, so they should always have warranty. But that's the world that we're moving into. You see, let me get in this article. It says many nations have urged U.S. President Trump on Monday to remain in the global agreement to combat climate change, even if he reduces the ambition of the U.S. pledge to cut greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Trump's main advisors are due to meet on Tuesday to review his threat to quit the 2015 Paris Agreement to limit global warming. That is backed by governments as diverse as China, OPEC, oil producers, and the poorest African states. And this is why you see everybody coming together to advocate for global warming, for climate change. And like I said, the debate of climate change is entirely controversial. I understand that. But we are now moving forward past the debate of whether or not it is happening and if we are the cause to what do we do about it now. Okay? At the United Nations negotiations that began on Monday in the German city of Bonn, the chairman of the talks, Moroccan Foreign Minister Saladin Mouzir, said global momentum to combat climate change was irreversible, and it would be difficult or foolish for anyone to defy public pressure for action. And if anything, this is why we hear a lot of rhetoric coming from people like Bill Nye, where he says that climate change deniers need to be locked up, we need to be imprisoned. That's crazy. That's authoritarian beyond measure. And I'm sorry for the viewers that are listening and that are fans of Bill Nye, but this is a man who is I don't want to say a propagator or a promoter. He's an entertainer. You know, I grew up watching Bill Nye, but then you get older and you start seeing, well, who's paying these people? Who's funding these people? Who wrote his script? You get a little bit older and you start seeing all these types of things take place. You realize some of your heroes are actually sellouts. Hulk Hogan. But continuing on, and this, like I said, this is why they're trying to push for everything to be eco-friendly, to be green-oriented, to be in the wake of sustainable development, because they will consider you foolish, they will consider you crazy, they will consider you a threat if you do not believe in the concept of climate change and global warming. I think that they need to pick up their mind on which term they would want to use, because there's a lot of different things that come with that, and that's if you ask me, another tactic that they're trying to do to confuse everybody. But moving on, the article says that at the talks, which run until May 18th, almost 200 nations will try to work out detailed rules for the agreement. Delegates called on countries to implement their pledges to cut emissions. When asked about the U.S. position, Yvonne Sligenberg, head of the European Commission's delegation, told a news conference, quote, "We do consider it that it would be quite important for the U.S. to stay at the table, even with Trump's pro-coal policies. Trump's advisors have warned of legal problems if Washington stays in the Paris deal, but waters down former President Barack Obama's goal of deep cuts in emissions by 2025. The Paris Agreement's Article 4 says any nation can adjust its goals at any time, with a view to enhancing its ambition. It does not mention an option of reducing ambition, and some U.S. legal experts argue that the wording makes it impossible for Trump to stay in the agreement and carry out his promise to promote the high-emitting U.S. coal industry. But many delegates say that the accord is vague enough to let nations scale back the ambitions if needed, perhaps because of future economic recessions or natural disasters. And this is another one of the reasons as to why I feel like we saw the spill take place not only in the East River in New York, but also in Washington with the Hartford site. Okay, and that's literally just this week. And then we also have a breaking report of how the Dakota Access Pipeline, how that also is leaking as well. So there's another thing, there's a number of things that I want to get into, but if anything, let's see if we can close out talking about how the judge has ordered Exxon to pay the biggest civil penalty ever imposed in an environmental citizen suit. And I think that's important to get this on here because and this is something we talked about before as well. They need to have some kind of pain. We need to be able to cause them some kind of pain, hit them in the pockets, right? And it's wild the amount of things that this is encompassing. And that's why I feel like the Dakota Access Pipeline got so much attention that it did, was to create green activists, to create environmentalists, these militant hippies, so to speak, people that care about the earth, or climate change activists, people that care about the earth, that are seeing the effects of man and trying to do something about it. And if you guys have paid attention to any of my older videos on my YouTube channel, where I talk about the technocracy, social engineering, geoengineering, and all kinds of things like that as well, and how eventually it will get to a point to where people will chastise you simply because of what you consume. They'll call you a dirty consumer. They'll tell you that you shouldn't have certain rights and certain things that you have simply because of the lifestyle that you've had. And that's where we're slowly heading to. I mean, look at the persecution that's going on with identity politics. It's crazy. But let me get into this article, okay? And this is from Countercurrent News. It says that George orders ExxonMobil to pay the biggest civil penalty ever imposed in an environmental citizen lawsuit. Okay, though it's, and I put this up May 9th, it's from Countercurrent News. It says that though it's actually a huge victory for Texans and anyone living near a refinery or chemical, olefins, or plastic plants, this order by the U.S. District Judge David Hittner is being celebrated primarily by environmentalists because of the message it sends to energy giants around the world. In a landmark decision that is believed to be the biggest civil penalty ever imposed in an environmental citizen suit, Judge Hittner took a second look at the case in which he initially ruled in favor of ExxonMobil and deemed the corporation to be at fault. The case was brought forth by the Sierra Club in Environmental Texas, who represented the citizens in the surrounding area and alleged that ExxonMobil had emitted more than 8 million pounds of hazardous chemicals and other contaminants from its Baytown complex than is allowed by state and federal law, as well as clean air permits. The claim was that these emissions spanned a 5-year period and originated from the complex, which is just 25 miles from Houston. That's crazy. 8 million pounds of hazardous chemicals and other contaminants. That's crazy. Over 5 years. And so, you know, for people that want to have a, I don't know, let me give you guys a little bit of a visual. When I think about this, 8 million pounds of some kind of hazardous chemical being shot up into the sky. What is a chemtrail? What are chemtrails? What are contrails? What are all these things we see happening here? I mean, in my own area, I had someone who were, I'll say this and then I'll get back into this and then we'll take a break. In my own area of New Mexico, we were dealing with a spout of rain and snow in April, where it rained for like 3 days straight. And so, and if anything, I might do like a mini cast on this, but somebody saw one of my saw my Instagram story where I was running, because I like to go for runs in the morning. I was running. I ran up to the mountain. I caught right where the sleet, rain, snow, whatever, right where it turned into the earth, or where it came over to me. And it was like that for numerous days. So the guy contacts me, sends me a message. He says, "Oh, you're in New Mexico?" I say, "Yeah." And then, you know, we continue the conversation. He says, "So you remember whenever we had that weird rain take place for like 3 days, right?" And I say, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, look at this." He sends me an image, right? He sends me an image of the mountainous area that I was in. But in this mountainous area, there was a huge black circle. Huge black circle, like clearly noticeable. And in that black circle, you see rays or some kind of something coming out from it, as if it's projecting something from whatever this black mass is, whatever this black circle is. And obviously, I'm going to immediately start thinking cloud seeding, chemtrails, something of that nature. And so then I don't talk to him for a few days. Because, you know, as always, I get caught up and busy. He messages me again and he says, "Hey, Freedom, I don't mean to bug you, but more information has developed as far as what was going on with this," because he couldn't figure out what that anomaly was. He was trying to figure out why there was just some random black spot in the middle of the desert, more closer towards the mountain. He finds out that there's apparently a new station built there, a new weather monitoring station. It looks like a huge... it looks like a golf tee with a golf ball on top of it. And he said he saw another one of these somewhere else in the same area. And basically what he was trying to say is, I think this is a HAARP weather modification station. Because when you see some of the pictures that he sent me, because the first picture that he sent me, he actually had it over a radar, and that's how we were actually able to see this. And it's all color coded and everything else. But basically what he was sending me was a picture of a HAARP station, and I'm not saying that they were conducting these types of experiments or conducting weather modification experiments, but I will say that there was some strange weather anomalies taking place while we were looking at, or while all of this was going on. At the very same time, I remember a article popping up about how in Albuquerque, New Mexico, they had recently talked about dumping all of the they talked about dumping radioactive material in I think in some reservoir. And so immediately, you know, I mentioned that to him, and my thoughts started thinking, well, if this is a radioactive reservoir, you know, we're talking about, we're literally talking about copious amounts of rain, 3 days of rain. Yeah, right there. Ironically enough, another article from Countercurrent News put up April 25th, drinking nuclear waste in Albuquerque, they hope you'll stay silent. And they talk about how the Sandia National Laboratory and the New Mexico Environmental Department are trying to pull off what some would call an environmental crime. They want to leave high-level nuclear mixed waste in unlined pits and trenches in a dump that is containing our drinking water aquifer. Crazy, right? Well, these are among the most dangerous wastes on the planet. They have plutonium, americium, depleted uranium, uranium-235, mercury, tritium, beryllium, sodium, TCE, PCBs, and hundreds of other radionucleotides, solvents, and heavy metals. All of these things. And I thought that that was crazy because here's somebody who's paying attention to the work that we're doing, and he's able to send me, in his own off work, some strange things that are happening in our area. Crazy, right? But is it so? That's what comes in my mind when we start talking about 8 million pounds of hazardous chemicals being put into the sky. That's what we're dealing with these days. That's why we're talking about terraforming Earth in the invasion. Let me get into this article and then we'll take a break. Okay, the Federal Clean Air Act allows citizens to sue the federal government for violations of emission standards and limitations, which is what encouraged citizens to go after corporate giant ExxonMobil. Quote, this ruling shows how crucial the citizen enforcement provision of the Clean Air Act really is for Texas residents. Luke Metzger, director of the Environment Texas, said in a statement, it means that private citizens victimized by the world's biggest polluters can get justice in the American court system, even when the government regulators look the other way. Though the judge originally ruled in favor of ExxonMobil back in 2014, citing that only a tiny fraction of emissions were bad enough to warrant legal action, the conservative-leaning Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals sent the case back to him, quote, for assessment of penalties based on the correct number of actionable violations. That was last May, and after a careful consideration, Hittner slammed the $19.9 million fine plus the plaintiff's attorney fees on ExxonMobil for a combined total of 16,386 days of violation of the Federal Clean Air Act at its refinery and the chemical plant. Now I know $20 million seems like nothing to ExxonMobil, but we got to hit them in the pockets. We got to start somewhere. If we can't let these people know that we're watching them and that we are like a hawk curious about what they do because it affects us in so many dramatic ways, then we can't hold them accountable. That's what we're supposed to do. When we do these types of things, when we talk about these types of things and how they're all culminated and how it all ties in together, what we're basically doing is trying to prevent them from continuing. We have to bring awareness to these issues so that they do not persist into the future. So we're going to take a break and we're going to be coming back talking about things like the nuclear waste that took place in Washington, as well as the Dakota Access Pipeline breaking with gallons leaking and everything else that we see taking place. But that's all I really have for you guys in this segment. So stay tuned and I'll talk to you real soon. And we are back. We're back again. We're back, and you know what's even crazier? Like I said, we were going to come back and we're going to start talking about what went on with this Washington nuclear waste facility and what all that means. Why are these things happening? I think that's what I need to do next. Outside of making a pedogate timeline, I think what I need to do next is literally start coming up with an oil spill timeline to see how many different things have taken place. Why are these things happening? Why are more of these pipelines bursting? What is that about? Or why are we still dealing with the Flint water crisis? Does anybody care about that? Does anybody see how this stuff is taking place? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't scare you. The fact that we could have, and I talked about this before earlier. I wish I had the numbers here in front of me. But with back in Florida, in the Mulberry County of Florida, how they had that spill over there. No one talked about that. No one talks about any of these nuclear waste spills. No one talks about any of these strange things that are going on. But they'll call you a dirty hippie if you say Mini Wakani, water is life. They'll tell you need to stop caring so much about the environment. Or they'll say climate change isn't real. They'll say none of this stuff is real. None of this stuff is taking place. Well, even if you believe that, explain why we're having all these other things taking place. Explain why there's nuclear facilities over there in Spain that are exploding, or Italian refineries that are exploding, or Fukushima. Explain that. Explain how our west coast is just being demolished by radiation. It's crazy, super crazy. Now let's get into this. How there was an emergency declared at a Washington nuclear facility, and how the take cover orders were issued. And I know, this is. Actually, I don't know, because this is crazy stuff to me. To me, I thought this is crazy. But this happened just the other day. The U.S. Department of Energy has declared an emergency at the Hanford, Washington nuclear waste storage site after a tunnel used to store contaminated materials caved in. And the tunnel that they used. About 3,000 workers are taking cover in at the 200 East area of the sprawling complex. Local media reported that by 10:30 a.m. local time, the take cover orders have been expanded to the entire site, which is about half the size of Rhode Island. Crazy. A portion of the tunnel near the plutonium uranium extraction plant, Purex, collapsed early Tuesday morning local time, most likely from vibrations produced by nearby road work. Oh, so nearby road work. That's it? That's all it's got to take to spill all of this? Okay. Initial reports spoke of a 4-foot, a 1.2 meter hole, which was later expanded to 20 feet, which is 6 meters across. The tunnel was used to store highly radioactive materials and equipment such as trains used to transport nuclear fuel rods. This robot is being used at the Hartford right now to sample contaminations in the air and on the ground. It's a pretty cool looking robot, but the Purex facility was built in the 1950s and used until 1988 to extract plutonium from around 70,000 fuel rods in total. The building has been vacant for nearly 20 years and remains highly contaminated. It's been abandoned and it's contaminated. Great. So we're dealing with a Chernobyl. Fantastic. Well, Chernobyl's a lot worse, but the same type of thing, where they're literally just leaving radioactive things here all over the place. It's crazy. Rail cars used to transport the fuel rods from nuclear reactors to the processing facility are buried inside the nearby tunnels. No workers were injured in the collapse, and officials have detected no release of radiation. The Washington State Department of Ecology spokesman Randy Bradbury told AP. Now, they said that there was no radiation, right? But we literally had to wait a year with the other case until we actually found out that there were some problems. So we'll see. With these people, I take everything with a grain of salt. Tell me one thing, and then I go do my own research, because there's another thing that we'll be bringing up later on as well. But right here, the emergency crews have already begun work on the collapsed nuclear tunnel facility. Great. That's great. They say overnight air monitors show no signs of radiological release. And that was on May 10th. But emergency workers have begun to stabilize and fill a 20-foot by 20-foot opening over a tunnel that partially collapsed near the Purex facility at the Hanford site. Non-essential employees remain off-site. In the 1950s and the 1960s, 2 tunnels were constructed next to a former chemical processing plant, the plutonium-uranium extraction plant, or the Purex plant, located in an industrial site near the center of the Hanford site, called the 200 East area. The tunnels were constructed of wood and concrete and covered with approximately 8 feet of soil. 8 feet, really. And what you guys are hearing right now is how these crews are actually working. You're seeing these boys work on it. Good job, boys. Thank you. We really do appreciate it. The tunnels were constructed to hold rail cars that were loaded with contaminated equipment and moved into the tunnels during the Cold War. Cold War tunnels? Really? Okay, during a routine surveillance of the area this morning, and this was put up May 10th, it's from the Event Chronicle, but during a routine surveillance of the area this morning, a 20-foot wide hole in the roof of one of the tunnels was observed, leading to the precautionary sheltering of employees and notifications to the area and states. After no contamination was detected, the shelter in place was lifted and employees were sent home from work early as a precautions. Workers continue to monitor the area for contamination as crew prepares to fill the hole with clean soil. The approximately 360-foot-long tunnel where the partial collapse occurred contains 8 rail cars loaded with contaminated equipment. The tunnels feed into a larger tunnel that extends hundreds more feet and contains 28 rail cars loaded with contaminated equipment. The hole opened up in the shorter tunnel near where it joins the longer tunnel. The tunnels were sealed back in the mid-90s and checked periodically. And now one of them has collapsed. And this is what we're dealing with. So there's no real proper way to deal with nuclear material. The half-life on those things, it's crazy. It's wild. And so this is what we have happening. But this is another thing that I want to point out to you guys is while all of this is happening as well, we have the Hanford site explosion. Sorry for calling it the Hartford explosion. But also here in America, we had the East River Spill. These all happened within this week. That's why we're doing this episode, is to explain that. Boom, perfect. It actually popped up right there in the video ticker, but we will play that for the audio listeners. And let's see if we can get this going.
Edison should have done more to alert the public after a major oil leak from one of their facilities into this waterway.
It's actually in their responsibility to let the residents of New York know that there was a spill. That way nobody could go out there fishing or nobody could go in the water.
This evening, we took Madera's concerns to Con Edison.
It's going to take some time to make sure that anything that is still leaking into the river is collected and removed, and that's what we're working on right now.
According to Con Ed, Sunday afternoon there was a transformer failure at one of their substations in the Dumbo neighborhood of Brooklyn. That transformer contained 37,000 gallons of insulating oil.
Some remained in the tank. Most of it just spilled onto the ground in the substation yard. Some is leaking into the East River.
The company says the leaked oil is not hazardous to humans. Still, for more than 48 hours now, a massive cleanup effort has been underway in the East River. Environmental contractors, the U.S. Coast Guard, Con Edison should have done...
Crazy. 37,000 gallons of transformer oil. And yeah, sure, it's not toxic. If it's not toxic, why weren't we told? The same way that there was 53,000 gallons that were spilled on Canada's First Nation land. How many more oil spills are we going to have? How many? And this actually, well, it actually happened May 7th on Sunday. But this, I still consider Sunday start of the week. But this is all happening at the same time. From North Dakota to New York to Washington, like everywhere is to Florida, everywhere is to even what's going on the East Coast with Fukushima. We're being submerged in radiation, submerged in all of this craziness. And I know, like, that's crazy, but think about it. What would be the best way for these people to react to all this craziness that we start seeing? Indeed, what do these people like to do? Constantly, they like to try to provide problems so that they can come forward as the solution, a problem reaction solution, the Hegelian dialectic. That's what they do. They are purposely destroying the earth so that they can come through with Agenda 21, with Agenda 2030, and the concept of selling free energy. right there with the Flamanville nuclear plant explosion. More explosions. More. It's wild. And so that's one of the things that blow my mind. Like I said before, we'll try to get a list together for you guys so we can kind of get a timeline for all these explosions and these nuclear spills that are taking place, because all of them are important. Okay, as I said before, we are being submerged in radiation, submerged in chemicals and all kinds of other things. These things, they affect us. They affect how we're able to operate. As I constantly harp on, all of this stuff bioaccumulates. All of this stuff affects us. It changes how our orientation. It changes how we're able to interact. You see how effective we can be. I have another article I want to pull up for you guys to kind of put things into perspective about what the next phase is. About where we're going. Actually, two articles, and they're actually from the same place. We talked about this beforehand, but the international laws on climate change increased from 60 to 1,200 in 20 years. The entire world has been deceived by global warming, by the global warming hysteria, creating a legal structure that will take decades to dismantle, assuming any desire to do so. The prospects of global cooling do not faze warmists. The nations around the world have adopted more than 1,200 laws to curb climate change, up from about 60 2 decades ago, which is a sign of widening efforts to limit rising temperatures, a study showed on Tuesday. Quote, most countries have a legal basis on which future actions can be built. And if anything, this is why we start seeing people talk about soda tax or food taxes. This is why you have people banning plastic, banning certain bags. I mean, apparently there was an orca found with increasingly high levels of PCB, polychlorine biphenyls, and don't quote me, because it sounded horrible the way I said it right there. But we've actually talked about it before on the show, and this is a Monsanto chemical, polychlorinated biphenyls. Yes, the levels of PCB or polychlorinated biphenyls found in Lulu's blubber were, quote, more than 100 times the 9 milligram limit, above which damage to the health of marine animals or marine mammals is known to occur. 100 times more than what we're used to. That blows my mind. But at the same time, we got to know that Monsanto and these people, they are something else. They are something else. But this article goes on to say that the UN's climate change chief told a webcast news conference of the findings issued at the International Meeting on Climate Change in Bonn, Germany. She says that the findings were cause for optimism, adding that the laws were one yardstick for tracking action on global warming alongside others, such as an investment in renewable energy or backing for a 2015 climate agreement ratified by 144 nations. The study by the London School of Economics, LSE, reviewed laws and executive policies in 164 nations, ranging from national cuts in greenhouse gases to curb in emissions in sectors such as transport, power generation, or industry. And this is what's going on in California. They've actually talked about taking steps sequentially to try to combat climate change. And this is why you hear people trying to say that they're trying to tax by the mile. They're trying to institute all these autonomous cars. They're trying to put all of these weird things into play that don't seem like they have a correlating factor, but this is indeed the correlating factor. Part of these international laws, these super random laws, these things that circumvent our Bill of Rights, our Constitution, the laws that we have for our own country. This is how they will create a one world government. Because what supersedes all of us? The planet. We constantly hear how you can't have a nation without borders, but how we also have people who are pushing for, I have no religion, I have no government, I have no nationality, I am a human, and my religion is the earth. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about how these people are trying to come in as the saviors, saying that we need to cut carbon emissions, we need to cut greenhouse gases, and we need to do something about it. At the same time, while they're over here doing cloud seeding with the chemtrails, the stratospheric aerosol injections, or the spraying of nailed over Zika mosquitoes. Don't even get me started on Bill Gates. The article goes on to say that 47 laws had been added since world leaders adopted a Paris Agreement to combat climate change in the late 2015, a slowdown from a previous peak of about 100 a year around 2009. 13 when many developed nations passed a law. Crazy. U.S. President Donald Trump doubts that the climate change has a human cause and is considering pulling out of the Paris Agreement, but legislation is often too complicated to do so. Quote, if you have a big body of 1,200 laws, it is hard to reverse, Samuel Frankenhauser, co-director of the LSE's Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, told that to a news conference. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people who literally want to try to have you so bound up that you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're doing. They want to have you literally paralyzed from all the types of things that you see taking place. What's even crazier is how it's working. Check this out. Welcome to Agenda 21, to your Agenda 21 apartment. Thousands of Hong Kong residents are forced to live in subdivided coffin homes. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine living in a 120 square foot, one room shoebox cubicle? A lady in Hong Kong, Lee Sweat Win. She has a daughter and a son. The son's 6 years old, daughter's 8 years old. She has to live in there, 120 square foot apartment. But here's the kicker. It cost $4,500 $4,500 in Hong Kong money, which I guess is $580 here. That's crazy. A month in rent and utilities eats up almost half of the Hong Kong dollars. That's $10,000. Wow, she earns at a bakery decorating cakes. Well, you know what? Let's just get into this article, because this is what I'm talking about. They want to be able to say that because humans are having such a detrimental effect upon the planet, that we need to be regulated. That's what Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030 is. I've talked about this before. They're trying to sell you free energy. They're trying to sell you what we should have natural access to. It's population control, politically correct population control. And this is what Habitat 3 is. And if we have time, we'll try to get into that. And Hillary Clinton was a big supporter of that as well. But ultimately what it is, as they said before, all these nations coming together saying that we need to start making subtle actions to push people into more condensed smart cities, more condensed human hubs to where they can monitor everything. These smart cities, so to speak. But let me get into this article. It is put up by Max Salvo of Freedom Outpost, and it says that the explosion of housing cost is one of the greatest economic crises of the developed world. From San Francisco to New York to London and Vancouver, the average worker's paycheck is devoured by the cost of rent. This daunting financial barrier is putting people on the streets and preventing the next generation from raising families and entering the middle class. Yeah, it is. I'm affected by it. Okay, for people who live in these cities, there's really only one thing they can do. Their only option is to look for a smaller apartment, even if it's tragically tiny. That's what's happening in Hong Kong, a city that has the most unaffordable housing market in the world. Over 200,000 of the city's poorest residents are forced to live in subdivided apartments, many of which are so small they can be dubbed, quote, coffin homes, according to the Daily Mail. Take a look at what... Let me see if we can try to pull up some pictures of coffin homes for you guys while we are actually talking about these types of things. A coffin apartment like that can cost around $300. As we talked about it before, 120 square foot cubicle. Looking up coffin homes, and it's only showing me actual coffins and then, pictures of homes. But we're going to, for the sake of time, continue on because I can't spend a lot of time looking. Oh, well, there you go. Yeah, this will have to do for now. And for the people that are listening in the audio feed, what we're actually seeing is basically what you would throw on to the back of a a trailer. This guy actually has it attached to his bike. That's what they want. They want you to live in these types of things. A good image for people to go look at is in the movie Fifth Element with Bruce Willis. He wakes up in a super tiny apartment. Everything is basically right along the walls, and I'm sure you guys have seen, smaller videos and pictures of these types of things, of these coffin homes and apartments and all these types of things. But what they're ultimately trying to do is have us in these small condensed areas where we don't really have all the luxuries that we have today. As I said before, they'll call you a consumer simply because of what your lifestyle is. If you're not living in these coffin apartments and abiding by these 1,200 international laws as provided by the Paris Agreement and subsequently Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, the United Nations, then you're not caring about the environment. And that's how these people want to portray us. They want to portray people who don't go by these types of rules as somebody who doesn't care for what's going on in the planet. But getting back into this article, it says a coffin apartment like that can cost over $300. But in many cases, subdivided apartments that are only a little bit bigger than that are homes to entire families. Single mother Lee Swit Win, the one that we were talking about before, said she struggled to explain to her son, who was 6 years old, and her daughter, 8 years old, why they live in a 120 square foot, one-room shoebox cubicle. Why do we always have to live in such small flats? Why can't we live in a bigger place? I say it's because mommy doesn't have enough money, said Lee. A single mom whose HK, $400 or $4,500 a month in rent and utilities eats up about half the HK she earns at a bakery decorating cakes. They fight over this and fight over that. If there's a day off from school, the two of them will then argue, she said. The bigger they get, the more crowded it gets. Sometimes there's not even enough room to step, she said. They don't even have space to do their homework. That's crazy. That is crazy. Homes like this are so common in Hong Kong that the UN has called the situation an insult to human dignity. And that's exactly what it is, because this didn't have to happen. Precisely, only 7% of Hong Kong's land is designated for housing. Precisely, and that's what we're dealing with. This is what's going on. We're literally dealing with people who cannot live effectively, who cannot live peacefully. That's crazy. Could you literally imagine not having a space to do homework or trying to shuffle past your brother or your sister or your mother? And that's exactly what we're talking about. That's where we're going into 2017. So yes, it is a human dignity crisis. And what will they do to remedy the situation? We're going to take a quick break and actually come back and talk about that. Things like renewable energy and how Bernie Sanders has introduced the most ambitious climate plan ever. And how things like Renewable Germany and Renewable Portland and all kinds of other places like that are buying into this agenda. But we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back talking about all those things. Stay tuned. And we are back. We are back, still talking about all these other things that are going on. So did you know that there was actually a law that would allow people, farmers, to sue Monsanto if GMO crops invaded their country, their property? I thought that was a huge win. Super cool, super huge win for us, for people, for the common man. I know, super simple. And we'll talk about, you know, renewable energy and things like that as well. But I feel like it's good to get these types of things on the record as well. And this was put up by the Event Chronicle, and it's by the Health Impact News. I put it up May 9th. And it says that a bill introduced into the Oregon legislature this year, would allow non-GMO farmers to sue biotech patent holders over the trespass by their GMO crops if their crops drifted onto their farms. Capital Press reports that the supporters of House Bill 2739 says it's a common sense strategy to remedy problems caused by genetically modified organisms or GMOs, similar to consumer lawsuits over defective products. Quote, "This is not a wild legal grab. We will not be compensated for our angst. We will only be compensated for our provable legal damages," says Sandra Bishop of the Our Family Farmers Coalition, which supports HB 2739. Jerry Erstrom, a Malheur County farmer, said he supports the bill even though he's planted genetically engineered corn on his property. "If you do something that messes up my livelihood, you should be held accountable for it." I agree, Jerry. Creeping bent grass that's genetically engineered to tolerate glyphosate herbicides escaped control in eastern Oregon, and the crop's patent holder should be responsible for the control costs as it spreads. I agree. I definitely agree. When these people plant these types of things, and that's what we talk about as well on the show, when they plant these types of chemicals, these crops, they change the biochemistry of the planet as well, to where they basically make the soil infertile. You can't place anything there. You can't grow anything there unless it's literally of the same seed, or unless you're getting something that's genetically engineered to operate in this manipulated soil. So yeah, you literally should be able to sue these people if their crops, if these GMO crops are invading their property. Okay, the HB 2739 survived a legal hurdle in April. It says House Bill 2739 would allow landowners to sue biotech patent holders for the unwanted presence of genetically modified organisms on their land. The bill has now been referred to the House Rules Committee, which isn't subject to an April 18th legislative deadline that recently killed other proposals. The move could effectively allow HB 2739 to stay alive through the end of the 2007 legislative session, scheduled to end in late June. I hope so. I definitely hope it passes, because people need to be held accountable. That's what we were talking about with Exxon Mobil. Even though it's only $20 million, that's perfectly fine. People need to be held accountable. We need to be able to call these people out when they're messing up, because they're messing up my future. They're messing up my kids' future. They're messing up everything. And if we don't have the legal framework to call these people out, we're in for a rude awakening. A very, very, very rude awakening. So as I said before, we're going to start talking about things like renewable energy, 2050, Bernie Sanders, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, free energy, and all of these other things. But how do they all tie in? Why are we literally dealing with these things? Why is this happening? Because they are trying to systematically destroy the planet. They want to destroy everything. That's all these people know, is destruction. So that they can come through and act as the saviors to still try to put a capstone on the concept of free energy and sell it to us. That's what it is. But let me get into this article. It says 100% renewable energy by 2050. Senators introduce the most ambitious climate plan ever. And this was put up May 10th from True Theory. And it's by Mayuka Saha. And it goes like this. The bill from Sanders, Merkley, and Markey reflects growing public demand to shift away from fossil fuels and usher in the era of climate justice. Senator Bernie Sanders, who we're all aware of, feel the burn, Jeff Merkley, and Edward J. Markey, a Democrat from Massachusetts, on Thursday introduced legislation to build a 100% renewable energy economy by 2050, a bill that environmental group 350.org previously termed the most ambitious piece of climate legislation Congress has ever seen. Although others caution it that it is not enough to meet real challenges of climate change. The 100 by 50 Act calls for 50% of the U.S. electricity to be produced by renewable energy sources like wind or solar by 2030, i.e. Agenda 2030. The 100% by 2050, i.e. Agenda 2050. It would require zero carbon emission vehicle standards and prohibit federal approval of oil and gas pipelines, among other measures. Quote, with an anti-science Congress and a president in power right now, some might doubt that this is the right time to push for a bold new strategy to tackle climate change and make a massive fundamental shift in the way we produce energy. Merkley wrote in a Facebook post earlier this month when he announced plans to introduce the bill. But the fact is, we don't have 4 years to wait to begin this rapid transition. We must act now. It was embraced by alternative energy groups such as NY Renews, which said in a statement Thursday that the senators were, quote, setting the bar for climate leadership in the wake of President Donald Trump's assault on our lungs, our communities, and our planet. Now, before I get back into this, I know I'm probably going to have people say, oh, well, Trump doesn't believe in climate change and fossil fuels and things like this. Well, that's really well and fine. We're not necessarily working with the duality political system here. We're not talking about which wolf is going to eat the sheep tonight. We're talking about how these wolves, there's a house of wolves, and they all built Rome, and how all of these roads lead back to Rome. We've already been signed up to do something about these sequential agendas that we are involved in. As I said before, we don't have time to wait for 4 years. We don't have time to wait until 2021, or when we start talking about Agenda 21, to deal with these types of things. We have got to start building the framework now, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're building the framework so that they can cut people off at the head. They want to, by doing this, by introducing these types of things, they control the conversation. They are able to dictate who does what, when, where, and why. Okay, the article goes on to say that 350.org co-founder Bill McKibben said, quote, 100 is an important number. Instead of making changes around the margins, this bill would finally commit America to the wholesale energy transformation that technology has made possible and affordable, and that an eroding climate makes utterly essential. This bill won't pass Congress immediately. The fossil fuel industry will see to that, but it will change the debate in a fundamental way. Yeah, precisely. And that's what I'm talking about. It might not do it immediately, but they want to control the debate. They want to push the narrative. They want to get it out there. Who do you think's funding Bernie Sanders and all these other people when they're saying these types of things? As I said before, the fossil fuel industry is going to fight tooth and nail to hold on to what they have. But who's pushing this new agenda? Who's pushing the renewable agenda? That's all I'm saying. I'm totally understandable of how we are having an effect on the planet and the types of things that we have to do in order to combat them. But we've got to ask the question of who's pushing what, why. One of these days, if maybe in the next Terraforming Earth edition, we'll come up with a timeline and all these other things where it alludes to the fact of other countries who have already signed up for this and what they're doing to act in accordance with this global treaty. That's what this is. How is it an invasion? Look at all the other pipelines that are blowing up. The pipeline explosion in Kansas, Fukushima, as I was saying before, the Florida spill in Mulberry. You name it. All these things are going on. It's an invasion because of how it's affecting us. And unless we get our hands around this situation and understand that we have to do something about it, that this is our time, then they will follow through with these agendas and control the narrative. You see. Right here. Article. Germany sets new record as renewable energy provides 85% of energy. And this is in Germany. Germany. Proving that we don't need to rely so much on fossil fuels. Now, this is from Countercurrent News by Jeremiah Jones, put up May 9th. It says, proving we do not need to rely so much on fossil fuels, Germany has broken a new record for renewable energy, with low-carbon sources almost completely replacing coal and nuclear power last weekend. At one point on Sunday, sustainable energy from wind, solar, biomass, and hydropower provided a record 85% of the country's total energy, according to The Independent. Unlike the U.S., where even national parks have recently been opened to coal mining, and that's another article. Sorry to jump in right there. That's another reason. There was an article that came up, apparently how Trump's new executive order would allow for people to start drilling in national parks. I think that's insane. These are national monuments. These are national treasures, and we're over here destroying them simply because we need the oil reserves that they have. If we're working off of our backs, that's not a good sign. And we shouldn't do that. If we're destroying the parks in order to get the oil, that's totally counterintuitive. Why would we have a national park if we're not preserving it? Mining it doesn't make any sense. Okay, I'm getting back into this. It says Germany has been investing heavily in renewable energy as a part of the government's Energiewende. That's what it says. Energiewende initiative. To transition away from fossil fuels and nuclear power to a low-carbon, environmentally sound, reliable, and affordable energy supply by 2050. For several hours on Sunday, electricity prices fell into negative figures as renewable sources produced so much power that supply exceeded demand. So much power that supply exceeded demand. Because, yes, we are swimming in free energy. We are swimming in all of the in abundance. It's because of our mindset, because of where we've gone, operating off of finite sources that we believe that we can't get off of it. Like a drug addict, we can't get off of this fossil fuel. We just need some more coal, man. And that's where we're going. That's what's going to happen with the coal industry or with the fossil fuel industry. You think big oil. Because look at how bad the people over there in North Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline had to fight. Look at what the Energy Transfer Partners did. You know Trump had stake in them? Did you know Trump had stake in, he had some money in the Energy Transfer Partners, the people that are behind the Dakota Access Pipeline? Oh, but he took his stocks out after presidency. I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. Let me get back into this article. It says coal use fell to an all-time low, with public broadcaster Deschutes Well reporting that on April 30th, coal-fired power stations were only operational between 3 and 4 in the afternoon and produced less than 8 gigawatts of energy, well below their maximum output of about 50 gigawatts, said the Independent. Quote, most of the Germany's coal-fired power plants were not even operating on Sunday. That's phenomenal, if you ask me. Patrick Gratian of Agora Energiewende told Australian news site Renew Economy, quote, nuclear power sources, which were planned to be completely phased out by 2022, were also severely reduced. Gratian also said days like Sunday would be completely normal by 2030, thanks to the government's continued investment in the Energiewende initiative. Germany announced in May 2011 that it plans to shut down all of its nuclear power plants by 2022. In addition to nearly eliminating fossil fuel power, Germany should be an example used to the rest of the world that renewable energy can provide for us if people are willing to invest in it rather than being onto the same old dirty forms of energy. And I agree. We're dealing with a world where we are stuck in a finite system. Oil will eventually run out, and then what? This is why, why they're coming out with autonomous cars, why they're coming out with more gas-efficient cars, why they're coming out with convertible cars or hybrid cars, because the way that we are living is no longer sustainable. And if this is cheaper, more cost-efficient, if supply is exceeding demand, clearly they're going to go with this. We're moving more and more towards an electric economy, more and more towards an infrastructure that caters to this reality. That caters to, people going out in the sun, getting some fresh air, being natural, enjoying life. People want that. People don't want to have to pay $3 for a single gallon of gas and a car that's going to eat it up by the time they get to the end of the street. People don't want that. I don't want that. That's not beneficial to anybody involved. And a perfect example of this, of this kind of hypocrisy or this insanity that we're dealing with. Did you guys know that Obama used a private jet, 14 cars, a 14-car convoy to get to his climate speech in Milan? Really? That's almost as that's basically exactly what Leonardo DiCaprio did. He must have taken a page from his book. Did you also know that Al Gore said that reengineering the world would take a $15 trillion carbon tax? I think we have enough time. We should have enough time to get into that, because this is the crux of it. As I said before, obviously we're talking about renewable energy, free energy, and things like that, but they are trying to They are trying to sell that to us, and there's a lot that comes with that mindset. And this is actually put up from Technocracy News, and it's by Fred Palmer, and the article title is Al Gore, Re-Engineering the World with a $15 trillion Carbon Tax. It goes like this. It says, Gore has not lost his mind, but he has lost his complete moral compass many years ago when he began to promote the global warming scam. Decarbonizing the world is anti-human and would do more to destroy the planet than to save it. Al Gore wants to reverse modernity. Al Gore wants to reverse modernity and save the world from itself through an elimination of its fossil fuel-based energy system. During the final week of April, his newly created Energy Transitions Commission released a document setting forth a fool's errand pathway to, quote, decarbonize the world's energy system. Interesting. You know, where we've actually heard this term before is one of the climate change initiatives, the UN's climate change initiatives, Cristina Figueres. She's actually talked about decarbonizing the world as well. If this sounds familiar, it is. Gore's plan features a new, sophisticated, and expensive public relations campaign, but it is based on his views on carbon dioxide, first broached in his 1992 book, Earth in the Balance, which he reissued in 2000 for his failed presidential campaign. The subsequent efforts made by Gore during the past 25 years has transformed little from their genesis, and he remains as tragically wrong today as he was in the first surfaced as the opponent of everything linked to carbon dioxide. If you scroll through the verbiage surrounding the document, you will find the core policy recommendation is a massive punishing carbon tax. And ironically enough, Washington, Oregon, and a few other places have started to institute, I think California as well, have started to institute the carbon tax, charging you basically to live, if you ask me. But Gore would start the tax at $50 per ton, which would increase to $100 per ton over time, essentially destroying the market for continued robust development of the world's fossil fuel base. Our economic growth and personal well-being depends on the robust fossil fuel use, so Gore's plan would destroy these as well. But don't worry, the all-in estimated cost to re-engineer humanity is a mere $15 trillion, enough money to give every man, woman, and child in the United States more than $46,000. Interesting. It would only take $15 trillion to get us to where we need to be. Huh. Crazy. This is crazy. And that's exactly what we're doing. When we're talking about transforming our world, the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, they want to tackle everything here. They want to tackle everything. That's what these people are, and they're control freaks. Right here, for the sustainable development goals. We'll say this, and then, ironically enough, I think we've actually run out of time, team. They have goals, the sustainable development goals, to end poverty in all of its forms everywhere. That's the first goal. And that's before we keep going into this, I think it's good to reiterate again that these people are trying to sound like superheroes. They're trying to sound like saviors. They're trying to come through and act as if they're truly environmentalists, as if they care about the planet. That's like Queen Elizabeth sitting there in her golden chair talking to her subjects about austerity, of poverty. And now we have Obama using a private jet, a 14-car convoy, and all kinds of other things to talk about climate. to talk about climate change. But the first goal was to end poverty in all of its forms everywhere. Okay, and the second goal is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. This is what I talk about with sustainable farming. The third goal is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. I wonder how they'll get that done. Goal number 4 is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So equal opportunities, as well as what is the Common Core? Yeah, precisely, Common Core. Goal number 5, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. I'm for that. I love the ladies. Moving on, ensure availability and unsustainable management of water and sanitation for all. So more of the hydropower. Goal number 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Goal number 8 is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. I'm curious how they'll do that with all the robots. Goal number 9 is to build a resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Goal number 10 is to reduce inequality within and amongst countries. Goal number 11 is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Human settlements, eh? And then it goes on. There's 17 more, and I would definitely advise you guys to go look at that. I'm actually reading from their documents. I printed that out today for my own library. It's Agenda 2030. I actually have the documents in the vault digitally that you can go read on our website, but I wanted to print these out physically so I could put them in my library so we could always come back to them and talk about these types of things. Well, ultimately, while talking about all these types of things and how they're all important, guys, we've got to understand that this is a global agenda. This is the New World Order. This is the Illuminati. This is how they will get you. We had to preface all of this stuff and explain it in this way to show you that no, when we have river spills in New York and nuclear sites crumble in Washington, and all these other weird explosions that are taking place, all these things are part of a carefully orchestrated agenda to where they can come through and act as though they're the saviors. They already have a plan. They already have a plan for everything that is taking place. You see. So we've got to understand that while they're doing these types of things, we have got to be aware of what the ultimate goal is. They want to have the moral high ground to say that, oh, well, we care about the planet, so we have to do this. But if you don't care about the planet, you don't have to. And that's what these hypocrites do. That's how they operate. That's why Obama's using private jets and a 14-car convoy to get to a climate speech to talk about how we need to cut back and how we need to be more conscious of the earth. You see. And that's where we're going in 2017. However, that's all I really have for you guys. I know I kind of went over a lot, or maybe I didn't go over enough. It's always hard to tell because I feel like I'm not talking about enough and I want to get out so much, and I try to have it in a short, concise, coherent way so you guys can understand it without there being so many hiccups because, I ramble. But I know I went over a lot, and I know all this kind of sounds speculative, crazy, and even rhetorical at certain points. But if we don't understand that we have to take care of ourselves, that we have to do the work, that we're supposed to put on our big boy pants, pull ourselves up from the bootstraps, and really take care of the world, instead of letting these people try to tell us what is right, what is wrong, then again, they will control the narrative, and that's what we can't do. We can't let these hypocritical people try to control us and tell us what's right and wrong, because clearly they have an entirely different definition of what that means. But I digress. As I said before, this is all I really have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll have it in the description bar below. Or leave us a voicemail at 843-900-6296. And as always, guys, stay vigilant, expose lies, and share truth. This is Noise Era, Freedom Faction, out.